Alrighty, boys and girls, welcome back to yet another episode of the Red, White, Claret and Blue Show with your hosts, Alex and Mr. Chris Kringle himself, Christopher Condit.
There you go. That was good.
Your American villain voices, and I think today in particular, we've been saying this a lot lately, but as always, we will be serving up the lukewarmest of lukewarm opinions after a victory that probably is splitting the Villarati in two as to whether people are super jubilant about it or just kind of letting it fall by the wayside. We'll dive into all of that soon. But before we do, Chris, you were kind of watching me. I was watching you a little bit. Were you just singing the intro song in your head there to kind of figure out, I was doing something. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I had a nice long weekend in my hometown of Cleveland and without my wife and children, so I got to see some friends, see some family, and spend some time in a city that I love very much. But then I'm back here where it's a little bit warmer in sunny North Carolina. Not too warm though. How are you? Besides coming from a basement.
Yeah, coming to you from a secret wood panel basement. Very nice pub here. But as I said, if this doesn't make the cold open, we are a no free ads podcast. And so I don't care that this is my in-laws pub. They are not getting a shout out until they pay us for it.
I didn't realize it was your in-laws that you're just like, no.
Yeah, no, pay me. Hey, listen.
You don't get dozens of
cold world of
impressions for
podcast
nothing.
businessing is, exactly. So I don't know what our main listenership is. I think it's 2 right now, the 2 of them. But in case there is, no free shout outs. You're going to pay for that exposure.
In case there is, this is a big secret.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, if you're listening on Spotify, I will say, or on Apple or on Amazon Music, we are on video now. I don't know if we kind of alluded to that last episode, but check out the YouTube, check out the Reels. All the socials are going to have video on them now. And so you get to see our pretty faces. And again, this nice little display of German beer steins behind me.
Did we not actually say that we were on video?
I don't remember if we actually did it. We probably started off with, hey, we're here on video now. We talked about our faces.
Yeah.
If anyone is curious as to the lack of cryons and identifiers, I am Alex, that is Chris. That is because we are testing out a few different video services over the past couple episodes, but I think we were just discussing before this. We settled on another one pretty quickly, so
this will be the last one like this.
This will be the last time without any sort of identifiers, and if we lose anything on the sound or the editing, well, sucks to suck. But yeah, it's cold here. It is 0 degrees Fahrenheit. It's blisteringly cold. It's just one of those where no matter what you put on when you go outside, you are cold. And so I am nice and warm here inside in this house. But, Chris, what was not warm was the reception that the Villa fans gave to Jack Grealish and Man City.
Well done.
A couple days ago. So let's dive right into it, sir. Villa tactical setup and approach. Our man, Johnny Duran, starts again. And actually, you asked me a couple podcasts ago, maybe even on the last podcast, like, what do you do differently with the formation? And I said, move Yori up to the 10. Start both the defensive midfielders, clog the middle a little bit, make yourself a little bit harder to break down.
Yep.
And Unai Emery, apparently, after listening to us for a while and then kind of falling off, I think he started listening again because that's exactly what we did.
He's a regular listener to the pod, clearly. Like, that's the obvious thing here. But yeah, I thought when I saw the lineup, I was like, oh man, this is like the exact lineup that Alex talked about wanting to try with Yori at the 10. And it worked, I think, exceptionally well. I thought that, especially given the weaknesses through the Manchester City midfield, their problems, because they don't have Rodri for one, but they have deeper problems than that. But the biggest single issue they have is they don't have Rodri. So that allowed Villa to really dominate through the midfield. And Yuri Tielemans played such a great game. We'll get more into detail, but he was awesome in that number 10 role. And it allowed the forward players, including John McGinn, a lot of freedom of movement and space to go forward. I thought that the tactical setup as well as the execution of it were really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I won't bury the lead. Yori is absolutely my man of the match. Every time he was picking out pockets of space, he was turning on the ball, making excellent passes through balls left, right, and center, and taking four guys out every single time he got the ball, and his ability to maneuver around people gets John Stones hauled off at halftime because Pep Guardiola realized he needed more athleticism in there. And I don't think that game goes the way it does. Everybody's going to talk about Morgan Rogers. Obviously, his goal was fantastic, and his ability to spring through and find John Duran for the opener was really good. He had an excellent game as well. But none of that happens if Yori Tielemans doesn't play like that.
I agree. A lot of people went Morgan Rogers man of the match. I thought it was Tielemans, and I think that the club and the supporters at the ground landed on Tielemans as well. I think he was actually named man of the match. So I thought that was deserved, and both guys played very well. In fact, pretty much everybody played pretty well. So we can't really complain too much. But Yuri just had such a great game, and he was exactly what we needed in that role against Manchester City.
I think it also worked because he didn't play. The formation changed a little bit, I guess is the easiest way to say it. It wasn't the 4-4-2 when Morgan Rogers and McGinn have been playing in that position, really as a second striker up alongside John Duran or Ollie Watkins. Yori was able to sit a little bit deeper in the number 10 role that we kind of called out for him as more of an advanced midfielder as opposed to a second striker dropping deep. And so what that allowed him to do was find that space in the City midfield. John Stone's not athletic enough to move with him. But I think what it also did was actually create a lot more opportunity for specifically John Duran and Morgan Rogers along the forward line. Morgan Rogers, as that left attacking midfielder, is able to play further forward. John Duran can range left and right a little bit more without occupying the same space as the second striker. So that takes advantage of his athleticism, his intelligence to be able to make runs in behind. And so that's why I think, we highlighted in the match preview that City have, 3 fit actual defenders that they're playing, maybe 4. And they were just allowing so much space, so much running room in behind. And so this will transition into the rest of Villa's tactics that you pointed out to me. But when Yori moves back, Duran and Rogers now are able to run and take advantage of that space behind because City was playing so far forward.
Yep.
And I think that we were able to do that and create that space because, like you said, Villa, as you and I have been calling for, sat much more in a mid, if not just a straight up low block.
Yep.
Won the ball and then tried to spring the counter as opposed to pressing a lot higher.
Yep. So one of the things that I wanted to call out specifically was the discipline by Villa, particularly in the first half, because what City tried to do, if you watched the game and the way they played, those short to intermediate passes, and then they would try the big switch to the right almost, or to their left, I should say, the Villa right most of the time.
To Jack Grealish.
But yeah, and Phil Foden was executing that ball very well. I actually thought that was their best move because of what was happening with those short intermediate passes, and Villa were putting 10 men behind the ball. Sometimes 11, sometimes everybody was back, including John Duran. But what City is trying to do with those short passes to intermediate passes is draw Aston Villa forward to break the lines, to make that mid block to low block easier to break down. But Villa stayed compact and tight, and nobody moved out of position. So the City was really forced to make that big switch because that was the only opening in the field, was just the shift from left to right because everybody was moving with the ball. It was the level of discipline there from everybody from the back forward was impressive to me in the first half.
It was something that Villa's been really effective at in recent weeks when we've been good is, as we've kind of described it, they don't just press or press relentlessly. They wait for the opposition to kind of get close to the midfield. And you saw John Duran almost standing on like the top of the center circle essentially. And only then, only when City got there, did all of a sudden everyone jump on. And then we would recede a little bit, they'd bring it in, and then everybody jumps. And so, when you look at the 15th to the 45th, 16th minute, we get the goal. Like that's precisely what happened. They got in. And as soon as we got, pressure close on, then we jumped on them, create the turnover, spring it to Yori in the 10, who again, his ability to check into that space that takes Morgan Rogers, takes John McGinn, takes whoever that second striker, an extra like 3 yards, 4 yards to try and reach. And by then it's gone.
Yep.
Yori Tielemans in the 10, jump that space. John Stones can't go with him. He's able to turn. Morgan Rogers is out. And then John Duran is never missing that goal.
I mean, it was a great pass by Rogers to give that ball up to make the extra pass and make it an easy goal, relatively easy goal. I mean, it was a really nice finish by Duran. It would have been a much tougher finish from Rogers under a little bit of pressure, and the keeper was closing that angle, so that allowed that square pass to Duran really allowed the goal to happen. But I've from the pass from Tielemans, like if you've seen, I'm sure you have on Twitter, the view from the opposite from Emmy's goal, like that is vintage what Emery was trying to create throughout the game. If you look, it's just vertical channels the entire length of the field, and City are spread across the entire pitch. So it was going to be, regardless of if Tielemans could complete that pass, which he did, like your alarm bells are going off immediately because you're so stretched across the back and frankly just not that good anymore, with the players they currently have available, that it was going to be either a big chance or a goal the minute that Tielemans got that ball off his foot. So like the execution of that was perfect.
Do you think that Villa scores that if Rodri is playing?
Maybe. I don't know.
It's huge speculation.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I think, we've talked about it. We talked about it in the preview. We talked about the importance of that, center midfielder, defensive center midfielder that can change the game. And right now, and it's not just Aston Villa taking advantage of it, it's everybody. Manchester City are, frankly, easy to break down on the counter, or at least they look easy to break down because they can't maintain their defensive shape, and the back four don't have the ability anymore to stay with these guys, at least not the way they used to. They're either too young or too old in different spots, So I thought that Emery came in and Villa came in with the perfect game plan to beat this team and executed it extremely well. I would have liked to have kept the clean sheet, and I think that was pretty well deserved, to be honest with you, because City really didn't threaten until the end, and even the goal that we gave up was off of a mistake from Luka Dean. It wasn't like City created something from that, So that's the only issue I really take with the game, but otherwise, it was great. It was a perfect game.
Yeah, there were certainly a few opportunities to score a few more goals.
Yep.
Talk about like 30 seconds in, John Duran, I see what he's trying to do. Ortega is backing up, and so he's trying to catch him on that back step so he can't spring left or right. But you probably want him carrying that ball another couple touches forward. McGinn, I don't think was great today. I think when he got into the final third, he misplaced a few different passes, missed some opportunities to slip some players through. So, could Villa have scored 3 or 4 today? Maybe. And to your point, we'd certainly prefer to have the clean sheet against this team. But yeah, not a lot to complain about. For the rest of the first half, though, let's before we get to kind of those second and third goals of the game. After the goal, it was pretty sustained 30 minutes of just City possession, City pressure, Villa kind of escaping, having a couple opportunities, not really, but really staying a lot compact. And some of this certainly tactical, some of this certainly City still being City.
Yeah, they still have good players. Like, they're not total trash.
Sure.
Yeah,
But I guess what I want to ask you about is they tried to run a ton through Jack Grealish, and ultimately it didn't wind up really amounting to
Yep.
much. Why do you think that
So
was?
I think a couple of things. I think that Matty Cash, even though some people still didn't give him credit, they said that he didn't play particularly well. There. I mean, that's Twitter, so take that with a grain of salt. Because I thought Cash was excellent. I thought he made a couple of clumsy challenges, but I think it was pretty clear that his goal from the start was to frustrate Jack Grealish, and that meant coming in late, getting a little nibble at his heel, at his shin, that sort of stuff. And he walked right up till he got the yellow card, and then they made an adjustment. But he probably deserved a yellow card earlier, if we're being honest, than he got one. But we got lucky in that sense that Cash didn't get the card until late in the first half. So I thought Cash played very well for one. Particularly in the first half when Emery pretty well left Cash on an island there to deal with Grealish. There's also the question of, is Jack Grealish that player anymore? Because it's pretty well been beaten out of him to not play the way that, oddly enough, that Pep was wanting him to play now all of a sudden after 3 or 4 years of like, don't drive at guys, don't try and make ridiculous goals from just inside the box, bending the ball like we've seen 100 times in an Aston Villa shirt. It was asking him to be old Jack Grealish, but he hasn't played that way in 4 or 5 years now, however long he's been at City. So it was, I think, a difficult ask for him. And I think the major issue for Manchester City remains service to Erling Haaland. If you look at the statistics, he had, at the half-hour mark, he had 4 total touches in the game. 4. At the end of the game, he had 1 touch in the opposition box, and it was a glancing header that he couldn't quite get to. I thought it was a decent ball from Grealish that was probably put a little too much on it, and Haaland couldn't get to it quite well, and it just glanced off the top of his head, went nowhere near goal, didn't threaten anything. So for Erling Haaland to be shut out like that by a team that has had the defensive struggles that Aston Villa has had, I think says a lot about the service coming into him and how poor it is. And I'm not trying to take away from the back four or the midfield, but
I was going to ask.
But that, so some of that is that we played really well, and we'll talk about the second half adjustment that was made to kind of change the way Pep Guardiola and City had to attack. But that's pretty poor, and you could see the frustration from Haaland. I mean, he's tracking back. He's getting stupid fouls because he's upset at not getting anything near the box. So he was visibly frustrated in this game, and I think it's a culmination of the fact that he's had a stretch of really bad games and they've had a stretch of really bad games, but also like this was a particularly damning set of circumstances, I think, for him to have so little touches on the ball and 1 touch in the opposition box. They're never going to win if that's, especially with the lineup they have available. If he's only getting 1 touch in the opposition box, you can just mark everything down as a draw or a loss because you're not going to create from that.
Yeah, so I think what I noticed is, to give credit to Villa, what we had been saying for a while was we're too open in the middle, right? Everybody's carving us, and specifically down the middle.
Mm-hmm.
When Rodgers gets the ball, turnover, he's in the 10, boom, you're the other way, and it's down the middle that gets us every time. And so when you bring in both Onana and Kamara, who are both gonna drift more towards that middle defensive shield role, and then you have Ezri Konsa and Pau Torres, probably our 2 best defenders in there as well, who are really good at just reading the game when it's all in front of them, you're able to plug up the middle there. And so when you look at what City wants to do versus what City had to do against Aston Villa, what City wants to do kind of what you said earlier. They want to draw Aston Villa out of that low block, and then they love the little intricate 1-2 passes that ultimately like springs Foden on a diagonal in between Luka Dean and Pau Torres, and that's how they get in beside, and that's how they get their tap-ins and their close crosses, and they've perfected the cutback that Aston Villa was using for a little while as well. And that's when City is at their best, that's how they're creating the majority of their opportunities. Against Aston Villa, they got one of those. You saw the back and forth between, I think it was Foden and Bernardo Silva, where Foden ultimately like fires at the side netting. And that was about the only time they were able to kind of work their way through the Aston Villa defense. Like you said earlier, they kind of tried that a little bit. They realized they weren't going anywhere. Aston Villa was saying discipline, and they'd wind up switching the ball out to Grealish. He'd run a little bit at Matt Cash, and then ultimately the way they tried to get a lot of their opportunities was via crosses.
Yep.
And as good of a header as Erling Haaland is of the ball, they were just never reaching him. They weren't good crosses because they don't necessarily have good crossers, because that's not how they typically create their opportunities.
Yeah.
So I found it really interesting, and I think it is, to your point, kudos to Aston Villa's defense that limited Erling Haaland's opportunities, because they were able to stifle City from doing what City normally wants to do and kind of frustrate them into creating opportunities in a way that they don't like to.
Yep. I agree. And like I said, the only thing they had available was that big switching ball from Foden. And again, they were executing it very well. But then from there was still nothing being created because Matty Cash was shutting down Jack Grealish. They're just, the crosses weren't there to land on Erling Haaland's massive head.
Yep. So the second half, both teams make some adjustments. John Stones comes out, Kyle Walker comes in, and I think Rico Lewis moved into midfield, giving them a little bit more athleticism there. Doesn't matter, because in the 46th minute, Yuri Tielemans has a filthy dummy to escape pressure, springs the other way. What speed by Kamara, by the way, to get out ahead of almost everyone and drive that ball forward. McGinn ultimately slips in Cash, who hits the side netting. Maybe a little shout for a penalty taking down John Duran in the middle. But first off, Kamara, really decent going forward. I think we've seen that more and more as he's been able to play within this lineup with a little bit more freedom, with Onana in there as well.
Yep.
But also let's talk about why Boubacar Kamara was even in that right-sided position at all.
Yep.
Because when the game started, Onana was to the right in that typical sitter role, and Kamara was on the left playing the little bit more advanced Yuri role. Second half, they flip, and you alluded to it earlier, the tactical adjustment and why that was. So, take it away and kind of explain why Kamara was on that.
I noticed it when it happened in the at the half. I think that what Emery saw was the want, or the need, in this case, the way we described it, for Man City to go at Matthew Cash over and over and over again down the City left, the Villa right. And so the switch was made to put Onana on the other side and Kamara on the right, which Kamara can range a little farther forward, but they also tuck Matty Cash in a little bit, and Kamara came a little bit closer on the defensive side. So what that allowed Villa to do was, I keep saying Onana. Kamara was responsible for inside when Cash got the ball on the... Golly, when Grealish got the ball on the wing.
I'm about to take over, dude. You explained it once.
And Cash took the outside when Grealish got the ball on the wing. So it really limited the City opportunities there in terms of what they were trying to do attacking with Grealish. So that's why I think Grealish was almost totally ineffective in the second half, was because of that defensive adjustment by Unai Emery.
I wish we had live comments right now to see if anybody actually followed.
Oh God, my text was great to you, right?
Your text was spot on. You should have just read that. No, I think we get it. Cash Kamara double up Grealish and ultimately force the ball off his foot. Cash doesn't feel like he needs to challenge it and tackle as much as he did in the first. And that's really important with him being on a yellow and us not really having I mean, God,
We had
God help
Ned.
us if we had to put Konsa out there
Yeah.
because we saw what Hudson Odoi did to him,
Yeah.
and I think Grealish would have been more of the same. Um, yeah, Grealish with a good half, and the second half not so much. I mean, he became as absent as Erling Haaland was. He kind of forgot that he was out there, thought he got subbed off. Um, 50th minute, I always love asking you about whether you feel like something is legislating toenails or not, but John Duran scores a beauty for his second. Great run, ultimately called back due to offsides. What did you think?
He was just off, if you ask me.
Okay.
Like it was very nearly a perfectly timed run, and he was just a hair off. I like when you saw it, he looked off, and I like when I was hoping that somehow I was wrong, and that he was onside. But it was close. But I think that was a fair offside call. I would have loved to see it stand, but I thought it was fair. I wasn't mad about it.
I loved the technique on the goal,
Yeah.
the way he kind of opened up, sent Ortega out, and then immediately closed his hips to shoot it at the near post. I thought that was a really intelligent finish.
Yep.
Just another example of how he's got the full locker. But
Sky's the limit, man. I'm telling you.
ultimately not necessary though, because just 9-ish minutes later, really nice interplay between Dean and Rogers. He should have made it too. Honestly, that was kind of a carbon copy of the Foden chance in the first half. But that Dean to Rogers to Duran, that back heel back to Rogers, who probably should do a little better. I mean, that was beautiful, and those three players kind of at their best creating something. I mean, it's Rogers Duran, a hell of a combo for the next handful of years.
I mean, they're both very young, so the fact that you have those two guys, not only for the future but for the present, is again just what a treat to watch those two play. And they both had fantastic games against Manchester City. So, like, I can't wait to see them grow together because I really do think that they have a real chance to be a special kind of duo in this Aston Villa attack.
Yeah, and so you want to also recognize the patience that Aston Villa showed in this game. I think that was kind of the first sign of it, but you ultimately get it 5 minutes later with the goal, and we'll talk about the run and all that in a minute. But over the first half, we talked about how Villa was staying compact, staying deep, and really just soaking up pressure. I mean, from John Duran's goal to the end of the first half, we might have got a sniff at goal, but like not really. It was a lot of defend, force them to cycle around and just sort of stay there. Second half, City starts to press a little bit. They realize that they need that goal to catch up. They start to open up a little bit more, send more guys forward. And so that's why when Rodgers wins that ball deep in the Villa half, there's so much more open acres of space for him to run into, bounce off of guys, and ultimately create that goal. So talk to me a little bit about what you saw there.
So I think a lot of it was with Rodgers' ability to run with the ball. We've been hard on him lately because he's lost the ball a lot in those exact sort of situations, right, where he's trying to run through what is a crowded midfield. But once he breaks that initial line with the way City was having to come forward, then there's just nothing but open space in front of him and three defenders, So you then have the ability with Morgan Rodgers driving right at defenders. It really opens up channels throughout the pitch again. We're talking, it's what you and I talked about in text, and it's what we talked about the first goal. You're talking about just vertical lane for guys to just start come bombing through. And that's what led to our best chances. Even when City were able to recover like they did for Rodgers' second goal. I mean, he made that fantastic run, but they still got a decent number of players back into the box when Rodgers passed the ball off, got it back, and made that great finish. At that point, City, I think, had 6 guys in the box to defend, if I remember right. I mean, they were on 6s and 7s, as our British friends like to say, because they were all backpedaling at that point. But they still got players back, because it's that run and that ability to take out defenders by driving at them that really opens up everything in the counter here for Aston Villa.
Yeah, and like you said, perfect for him to release to McGinn when he did.
Yeah.
I think previous weeks of Morgan Rogers just keeps dribbling that ball and ultimately gets it taken off of him. But the timing of the pass, the continuation of the run, and then also to give credit to a guy that we heaped praise on to start this podcast, Youri Tielemans, who ultimately makes the run to the outside of McGinn, draws the defender out there, and that actually gives McGinn that extra second of time to be able to find Rogers back. So really intelligent, selfless run by Youri Tielemans. Knows he's never getting that pass, but that's ultimately what opens up the space. And then, Chris, I said to Katie that Duran and Rogers' celebration is kind of just like you and me on this pod, right? Just give me a little, give me a little pose. Come on, we're basically the same.
I do. Yeah. I do want that. I want that photo, of those two guys standing there like that, because that's like I said, that's Aston Villa's future and present right now. But again, they're both so young. It's hard not to be excited.
And they love each other, which clearly, just makes it better and better. Yeah.
And when Duran scored early in the 16th minute, you saw the first thing he did was point to Rogers to recognize that pass, and show that it was you got me that goal, So I mean, it's clear that they have not just a great relationship on the pitch, but off.
Yeah, and the last thing that I have to say on the game until the City goal is just, again, back to John Duran. We say every week about how he's becoming this more and more complete striker. Obviously, he scored today. Almost had a second, almost had an assist. Obviously, very, very involved in the offensive side and improving his game there. But defensively, I think we really need to acknowledge the strides that he's made. He had the one where he caught up to Ortega at some point in the second half and ultimately slid in, almost deflected, wound up deflecting kind of sideways for a throw in. That's probably like the third or fourth time he's almost caught a goalie this year with his deceptive speed, pressing them down. I thought he was really disciplined when he pressed, how he pressed, who he pressed in the game, really funneling some of the defenders in certain directions, not too big to track back at all. He came all the way back. And actually something that I noticed that I wound up seeing earlier today, Unai Emery commented on as well, was on one of City's early corners. He was on the front post and actually was the one to head it away. There's another part where he gets a ball, immediately knows to kind of clear it out. And Unai Emery talked about the fact that when we lost 4-2 to Arsenal, a part of the reason Jorginho scored was because the first man who should have jumped up and headed away was John Duran. He didn't. And so he acknowledged the fact that that's what we wanted John Duran to do. That's where we wanted him to impact the game defensively. And he says he saw it yesterday in Man City. So praise from Unai and praise for John Duran for not just being the celeb who wants to score the goals, but someone who's actually willing to do a bit of the dirty work to ultimately be the complete player.
He really is. We said before, he's really turning into a complete player. Everything from his tracking back and defending, his positioning, everything is tracking the right way for him to really be something special, in not just in this league, but in Europe, internationally. Like you can see glimpses of him being an extremely special player. So that's exciting for us, obviously, as Villa fans and as two guys who have been on the John Duran train since that first rocket off the crossbar. So
yeah,
vindication is here right now for us, and it's not been that long,
No, suck it, Clay. So I do want to talk about the City goal for a little bit, because we looked very composed defensively throughout the whole match, right? Kept them to one or two good opportunities, and what we clipped and posted on social last week was my rant about all these but-fors, right? Villa would be okay as long as these things didn't happen. And I was kind of like, how many times are we going to say this before we acknowledge this is just a fact of the team? And you kind of said it earlier. City scored a scruffy goal. It was a Luka Dean error. He hasn't made many this year, whatever. It's another but-for that ultimately prevents us from getting a clean sheet, from feeling completely confident through 90 minutes. And we just need to focus.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these are focus. Pau
Yeah.
Torres, Tyrone Mings, like look at this is focus.
Yeah.
90 minutes of concentration is all we're asking for, and yet this team can't seem to do it.
And that seems strange because the manager is so hyper focused, right? So you would expect that the team would follow suit, but maybe it's that. Maybe it's that
it's exhausting.
Yeah, maybe it's Emery needs to relax a little bit and trust the players to do what they're supposed to do. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer. But you're right, because that was like it was another goal. Like how many times now this season have we said XYZ opponent scores from nothing? And that, I mean, even when City had consistent possession and just kept coming down, they rarely threatened the goal. You know, it wasn't like Emi Martinez was called into action a bunch of times and had to make a ton of fantastic saves. It just didn't happen. I think City's expected goals was something like 1.1 in that game. So
I think I saw 1 on the dot.
Yeah. So yeah, it like right where they ended up, and I think that the bulk of that XG probably came from that shot, you know. So it's not like they were creating chance after chance after chance after chance. So yeah, I mean that is something that remains a frustration for as well as Villa played against Man City. That's not a good thing, you know. And if we're gonna be lukewarm, we have to talk about it. It was a mistake, a big mistake from Dean, and again allowed City back into the game. You know, City a year ago, if that happens, you know, in the game this time of year where we dominated, right? If that happens and we happen to be 2-0 up instead of 1 in that one, but like let's just pretend. I think City comes back and scores again because you could see the confidence growing. Luckily, they ran out of time, and I think they're so lacking in confidence now that they didn't have the belief that they could come back and tie it up, you know, whereas previous iterations of Manchester City would, I think, have that resolve and that belief that, yeah, all right, so what? It's the 83rd minute or whatever it is. We're going to score again. Hell, let's try and get the win. You know, I want it to get figured out because right now, where we sit in the league, we could be sitting second if we just keep focused, you know. And I don't want to play that what if game, but if you look at the results where we've dropped points, if you change those, we're like second or third. And again, we've still not played our best football outside of a couple of games. So that's a frustrating element of this season so far.
That's exactly it. And, you know, to your point, staying lukewarm about this, I'm kind of leading into larger implication on the season. I'm actually not taking a ton from this victory with how bad Man City is right now. I'm putting a victory over Man City in the same bucket as victories over Brentford, Southampton, and injury-ravaged Red Bull Leipzig more than I am a game against Nottingham Forest.
So funny story.
And that is something...
They have the same number of points as Southampton since November 1st.
Actually, I think with Southampton's draw, they're above.
Oh, yeah, so that's right. Yes, that's old data. You're right. Yes,
Man City is dead last now since November 1st.
Yeah.
So I'm actually not taking a ton about Aston Villa from this victory in terms of like larger implication. Does this mean that it's a turning point? And it was not a flawless game. To your point, I forget when it actually happened in terms of like the exact minute. But there was a point where Man City had a cross that got deflected. I think it was a Jack Grealish cross that basically the ball just ran dead across the penalty spot and out the box, and no one got on it. And ultimately Villa did, and cleared it out, or Man City did and cycled it around. But Man City of last year, with the players that they have, with their tactical discipline, like Ilkay Gundogan is making a late run into the box and smashing that upper 90, and that's the first goal.
Yeah.
And ultimately then Phil Foden's is the second or the third where they ultimately catch up. That to me was almost more emblematic of where Man City is now than anything. The fact that they didn't get to that ball and create an opportunity out of that one. And so I look at this game and say, yeah, there were a lot of good things that I saw. Morgan Rogers played great. Yuri Tielemans played great. John Duran scored a goal, etc. It was, again, to stay lukewarm, not a flawless performance from Aston Villa
Mhm.
against a team that really you should kind of expect yourself, if you're going to be challenging for top four, to have a flawless performance against. So, larger implication, Bournemouth won again, where we fall back to sixth.
Boy, they look
You
they look
talked about
good
you
doing it
talked
too.
about
Yeah,
you talked about silly goals that we're giving up and this being a pattern. We are on the same points as Bournemouth. They have a +6 goal difference. We have a 0. And
right.
like, where do those goals, as I've kind of been saying week after week, begin to factor in and start to become something that we really start to rue as the season continues?
I think the more important point than goal differential, and I know that you and I just differ on this, but
Yep.
I think the more important point is not dropping stupid points. Like
Yeah.
that's and that's going to fix the goal differential, by the way, right?
Yeah.
So like that's the bigger problem, is that we have dropped so many points from winning positions, and that's not where we want to be. And the fact that we're still sitting sixth despite that is, I think, a good thing, but if you want to really compete for top four, and the club did not have top four as the goal this year. The club's goal was top seven. That's been pretty clear from all the reporting, and I think that's reasonable, given what we've seen happen to Newcastle, for example, when they played in Champions League and all that. So I think finishing in European places is a good, reasonable goal, achievable goal for this team. However, like I said, the way things have broken and the fact that we're sitting sixth now with 10 drop points from winning positions, like, that's crazy. Just think about having those 10 points back and where we'd be sitting in the league at that point. So I'm happy to be where we are. Don't get me wrong. And I'm happy to be where we are in the Champions League. It's also a positive. But at the end of the season, we're going to look back and say, point here, 3 points here, point here, 3 points here, and wonder where that's going to put us at the end of the year.
And, we haven't spoken about it yet, and I really don't want to, because we spent way too much time on it last year, but might only need fifth this year.
Yeah.
It seems to be tracking that way again, and now
it was tracking that way before.
I know. So we'll see where that all nets out as well. But
if we didn't have Man City dragging down that coefficient, we'd be way up. They are, though. They're 22nd.
They are. Anyway, let's. Do you have anything else on this game, or should we move on?
No, I think we covered all the points I wanted to hit. Yeah.
All right. So, couple cold waters. First one, Chris. For the foreseeable future, Ollie Watkins is not starting. He is at best a rotational piece.
I don't pour a lot of cold water on that. I think that right now you have to go with Duran. He just keeps scoring. So how do you take that out? And I think that it's going to be frustrating for Watkins, because he's obviously a great striker. You can't have these long stretches of not being goal involved and not scoring. And he's always done that sort of thing where he's scored in bunches and all that. The problem has been that his goal involvement hasn't stayed up the way it usually does, right? So when he didn't score last year, he was still assisting. He was still involved in those goals. That hasn't been the case this year. So it's been very clear, at least in the times that Duran has been on the pitch, that that's when Aston Villa have looked the most lethal and the most dangerous. But I do think utilizing him the way they did, like in the game against City, for example, when they brought him in, it was the perfect time, because he's then going to be able to hold up play better than John Duran in those instances. So when it's time to hold up play and we're up 2-0, in the 75th, 80th minute, perfect time to bring him on. And then, yeah, we can still use him to start in spots because we still have a lot of games to play. But right now, I think you have to stay with Duran.
Durant has 6 starts and 6 goals in those starts.
Yeah.
Not that he scored 3, and then hasn't scored for 4. He has scored in
Mm-hmm.
all 6 of those starts.
Yeah.
So he's not a super sub. He's not someone
He's
who
super.
needs to take advantage of. He's just super. But I think the narrative on him has been, we don't know if he can start because he's always taking advantage of the tired legs created by Ollie Watkins' work. Clearly, that's not the case.
Right.
He can do it when they're fresh. He can do it when they're tired. And someone scoring at the clip that he is, I think you texted me that it is now, for the games that he's played, the fastest goal rate in Premier League history, yes. Right?
Every 82 minutes.
His contributions.
Every
82 minutes, he scores a goal. Why would you not try and give that kind of a talent as many opportunities to score as possible, aka more minutes?
Yep.
So, no, this is not to say that Ollie Watkins, to your point, doesn't have a role to play, that he's not going to be a sub that can take advantage of the last 20 or 30 minutes. I thought 81 yesterday was actually like Unai giving a hand clap to John Duran as like, you put in the work, you put in the shift, and like, I'm going to give you as close to 90 as possible and then just let you kind of take the adulation.
Yep.
As opposed to like a 60th minute sub, which feels like much more planned.
And again,
but there will be games.
Hold up was an idea there too, right?
Yes, absolutely hold up. But then you see Ollie Watkins come on, gets a pretty decent opportunity when Morgan Rogers slips him in and fires it right at the goalie. So Ollie Watkins needs to take this challenge and make Unai have a difficult decision, because I think you and I both think right now the decision's not all that difficult. He'll start games. We've got a lot of games to play. We've got the FA Cup coming up. We might have a dead rubber Champions League match if we can somehow beat Monaco. So like Ollie Watkins is going to get minutes. We're not saying that he should never play again. Again, having 2 good strikers is a good thing. You've said this every week for the past couple months. But yeah, I think John Duran is your go-to.
Right now, you can't take him off. He's unplayable right now. You know, that's it.
All right.
You want me to do the second one since it was mine?
Yeah.
So this is from at Villamad_5 on Twitter, and I quote: "Let me make this clear: Aston Villa owes Jack Grealish absolutely nothing. Jack Grealish owes Aston Villa absolutely everything." Alex, how do you like that take?
I'm taking a fire hose to this take. Like this is so stupid. This is so stupid. We could have. Aston Villa doesn't owe Jack anything. When Spurs were in there trying to get him for like 15 million and didn't want to go to 20. You know why? Because Jack Grealish said, I'm not going to hamstring this club and only go for 15 million.
Yeah.
Jack Grealish was the one, when he could have gone for a lot less, re-signed a new contract and put in an out clause in there to make him the highest paid, the highest British transfer of all time, the 100 million, to make sure that if he left, Aston Villa could rebuild for the future.
He stayed through the championship, man.
He stayed through the championship in arguably his most important developmental years. Like I will be completely transparent by saying that he might have hamstrung his career, cut it off at the knees by staying in the championship with Aston Villa. At that age, if he goes to a good club with the talent that he has, actually gets minutes, potentially plays in the Europa League, the Champions League, whatever it is, he's been a starter at England for years. We know he was never getting a look in when he was a championship player, even when Aston Villa came back up. He's got a longer English career. I mean, who knows if he ever winds up with Pep Guardiola. He might wind up with a manager that kind of appreciates him better. Like him showing the loyalty that he did to Aston Villa, I hope he doesn't regret it despite the boos that he got yesterday. But no, Aston Villa owes him just as much, if not more.
It's a two-way street.
They gave him a platform. Yes, we gave him a platform. Yes, we built an offense around him. Yes, we gave him Dean Smith and, gave him this opportunity to succeed. But he did a lot to put the club in the position that it's in now, too. And I don't – first year after he left, I understand booing him, my city, my club. I get how that looks hypocritical. But when you look back at everything he gave – both with his heart and financially to the club, I can't stand by the boos, and I can't really condone what the Villa supporters did yesterday. So Jack, if you listen, Red, White, Claret, and Blue loves you. You're welcome back with open arms anytime. We'd be happy to interview you and give you a platform to tell your side of the story. Hop on. But yeah, what about you? Anything that I missed?
No, you didn't miss anything. I mean, you know that I've been and I am one of Jack Grealish's biggest fans. He's the best player I've seen outside of Emi Martinez in an Aston Villa shirt. You know, and the booze I don't get. I don't. I like Grealish could have gone many, many, many times. He waited until it was £100 million to go, and he went to go win trophies. And by the way, without that transfer, we're not here right now. Without that £100 million, everything is different. So that transfer put us in position, because that made us PSR eligible for the next 3 seasons, because they were able to amortize that, over the 3 years. So there was 33 million, 33 million, 33 million. Anyone who doesn't understand the impact that had on the club, I can't help you. And you just don't understand how big that was to where we are now. Because without that transfer, you can forget about Champions League. You can forget about Unai Emery coming in with Monchi and building this team, because it doesn't happen. It doesn't.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, from Jack to Newcastle, I actually don't really have a transition for that. I got nothing. From the gifts that Jack Grealish gave us to the gifts that we will be opening on Boxing Day, we look ahead to Newcastle away, 10 a.m. on December 26th. We got there in the end. So far this season, Newcastle, they are in 8th place, 26 points, so 2 behind Aston Villa with a +6 goal differential. I've started to mix in goal differentials now just to piss you off.
Yeah.
What I will say about Newcastle is when they're good, they're very, very, very good. They've beaten Chelsea in the Cup. They've drawn Man City back when Man City was actually good. They smashed Forest 3-1, who we couldn't get past. They've beaten Arsenal. They've drawn Liverpool 3-3. And yet, when they're bad, they're also very bad. They've lost to West Ham. They've drawn Crystal Palace. They've drawn Everton. They got smashed 4-2 by Brentford. So, weird team to predict it, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about their tactics, their approach, and some of their underlying metrics there. But at least in the last 3, they're scoring goals for fun. Not the greatest opposition, but 4-0 over Ipswich, 3-1 over Brentford, and 4-0 over Leicester. So certainly coming in flying high and playing well at home.
My primary concern, I have 2, I guess. So there are 2 concerns I have. One, Newcastle away is always a difficult fixture. And, we saw that last season. And 2, maybe more importantly, Eddie Howe seems to have Unai Emery's number. He seems to have the tactics to break down Emery. And I don't remember the exact head-to-head stats, but I mean, last season was a great example. 2 of our worst games of the season were against Newcastle. Even though Sir Alex thought we did great in the first one when we lost 5-1. But you don't like losing 5-1, regardless of how good you may have looked or executed outside of the 5 goals you gave up. Mm-hmm. So I think those are my 2 concerns coming in. It looks to me to be a difficult fixture, and I think that if you were to ask me tactically, what do I think we need to do? I think it's very similar to what we did against Manchester City, because I think what Newcastle have been able to exploit since the Emery era has started is that high line or offside trap, where they've been able to get behind really, really easily. At least last season, that was the case, right? So I think that we need to sit deeper like we did and let them possess some of the ball and then try and spring the counter. I don't make a whole lot of changes going into this one.
Yeah, what I think Eddie Howe is doing really well this year is he is very tactically adaptable and flexible depending on the opposition.
Yeah.
And we scout a lot of these teams and we look for patterns of how they play home versus away, and does that indicate how they're going to play against us? And we look at, overall, are they staying with consistent formations, consistent players? Does their star player Callum Hudson-Odoi always play off the left, and that's why they attack down that side most of the time? And as I'm looking at everything for Newcastle, they've had everything from 23 to 78% possession in different games this year. They'll have some matches where they streak 35, 38, 42, and then they'll have 3 straight where they have 65%. So do they want to dominate the ball? Do they want to sit back and defend? Doesn't really matter. Last 4, they're somewhere in the 55 to 60% range, but when they're at home, they possess it at 14 percentage points less. Who would see that coming? Right. 43% at home, 57% away. Their expected goals, sometimes they outplay the opposition. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they win when that happens. Sometimes they lose when that happens.
Sound a lot like Aston Villa in a way,
A little bit. Yeah. One thing that I also found interesting was the fact that they have more interceptions and fewer offsides when they play at home, which makes me think counter to what you want them to do. They actually do play a little bit higher up, get those interceptions, and they're not necessarily looking to spring the counter. But then you combine that with less possession, and you would say, but then they should probably be sitting deeper. The numbers don't make any sense whatsoever. I'm so confused. All I will say is that this is the first team that I've ever seen on WhoScored's website get listed as no notable weaknesses.
Wow.
None. City had them.
Yeah.
Bayern Munich had them. But Newcastle is the only team I've seen with no notable weaknesses.
I mean,
weird.
They have built a decent side. They've spent a lot of money to do it. They've run right like Aston Villa. They've run right along the edge of PSR. And I think a lot of Villa fans and Newcastle fans sort of now see each other as kindred spirits because of the PSR
friendly rivalry.
Yeah. But I think like they do have a lot of very good players and dangerous players. We've seen it now for the last 2 years, right? So I think it's going to be another tough one. I know I predicted 3-1 loss for Villa against City, so I think this is another tough one. We've talked about how difficult this stretch of games is, and I don't feel great about it. I'm not going to lie. I don't feel good about Newcastle away. I don't feel good about the matchup with Eddie Howe, despite the fact that we came off a very good game against City. I don't have an especially good feeling here.
All right. Well, before we get to your score prediction, so you talked about some of the good players that they have. Isak, everybody knows who he is. 10 goals, 4 assists. He's close to the lead on their team in assists as well as goals. Kind of their Ollie Watkins, I guess, do it all center forward. But a couple guys that I'm looking out for. So Jacob Murphy has 3 goals, 5 assists. He's actually second on the team in goal involvements with those 8. And he's really just finishing great chances. He's not anywhere near the top in progressive carries, progressive passes received. Like, he just kind of pops up and finishes those chances. He's not close in goal creating actions. But who is Anthony Gordon. 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 goal involvements so far this year. But he leads the entire Newcastle team in progressive carries, progressive passes received by nearly 20 over anybody else, as well as shot creating actions by nearly 20 and goal creating actions. I think he's nearly double the next closest player. And we talked about how Eddie Howe is really tactically adaptable. Anthony Gordon is lined up on the left wing. He's lined up on the right wing. He's lined up in right midfield. He's lined up in left midfield. And so I think that they're really trying to run the offensive third through him a little further back. It's Bruno Guimaraes. Absolutely. He, is the one who's kind of spraying the ball all over the park. But I think they really try and use Anthony Gordon to take advantage of whichever side matchup they feel a little bit stronger about. And so look for him to move around the pitch depending on who Unai Emery and Aston Villa start, if Eddie Howe thinks that there's an opportunity to exploit and take advantage of. You're on mute.
Andrew Tonali, because I know he's a big fan, or you're a big fan of his. But there are some reports that he's unhappy at Newcastle. So I'm intrigued to see how that matches up, because I do think that like you, I'm not as big of a fan of him as you are, but I think he's a very good player and a very dangerous player. And I think he started 7 games, I think. So he doesn't start every game, but he's started a decent amount. I remember him giving us some trouble last year in the second game, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So like they've just got overall a very good roster. And Eddie Howe, I think, is a good manager. I like, if you were to ask me who's better, Unai Emery or Eddie Howe, I'm taking Emery. But Eddie Howe is probably the best English manager going right now, in my opinion. Not that that's necessarily a super high bar at the moment. No offense to my British friends, but it's not great at the moment. But he's always been well respected. I've always liked him when he was at Bournemouth. I thought that he did very well with a shoestring budget at that point at Bournemouth. So, like I said, I think this is just going to be a really difficult matchup.
Well, Tonali is every gambler's idol, right? He did it and got away with it. But what I will say, I'm with you 100%. I think Eddie Howe is a really good manager. I think he doesn't always get the credit that he deserves.
Yep.
Side note on the British managers, I'm kind of shocked that Graham Potter hasn't really found like a marquee position again yet, considering that he was pretty good at Brighton. But whatever.
Yep.
That's neither here nor there.
But he was very poor at Chelsea, though.
Well, a lot of people were pretty poor at Chelsea for quite a while until Enzo Maresca. Let's. We're not here to talk about Maresca, though. We're here to talk about Villa. The only similarity is they both end in A. So, Chris, what are you expecting from Villa? You said probably similar lineup, but what are you thinking tactics-wise, knowing what we know about Newcastle?
Well, I think, like you said, it's a difficult match to prepare for because they seem to adapt their tactics very well. So I'm looking at what I think is going to be most effective for Aston Villa based on the way we've played this season and the way we played last season against Newcastle. So I'm looking for a mid-block like we saw. I think that's going to be the most effective way to limit the offensive chances for Newcastle and also limit the potential for Aston Villa errors, because we play so much better when our midfield and our defensive backline are more compact. So I think that I want to see what we've talked about for the last 2 or 3 weeks: a more compact defensive structure, and then attacks down the wings and not staying so narrow through the midfield, because I think that's where there's going to be channels for Villa to work.
Yeah, I too don't really see any changes from what we saw yesterday. You go from the earliest game on Saturday to a late game on Thursday. Like, there's a lot of time to recover. I think if you're going to do rotation, it'll be before Brighton on the subsequent Monday. And so, yeah, I keep the lineup the same. I think tactically,
I would do the same. Yeah.
Tactically, I would treat Anthony Gordon the way we did Jack Grealish in the second half. I don't give him a half to get going. I say whichever side he lines up on, Kamara, shade that way. And if it's Luka Dean, you double him up with Luka. If it's on Matty Cash's side, you double him up with Matty Cash.
You're more worried about him than you are about Grealish? Is that what you're saying?
Probably.
Yeah. No, it makes sense.
And if I'm Newcastle, I'm lining him up over Matty Cash rather than Luka Dean. I think, yes, Matty Cash is faster, and Anthony Gordon sure has some pace, but I think Matty Cash is also more prone to a rash tackle, and so you get the opportunity to create a yellow, create a red, create a handball, create a dangerous free kick opportunity. So I try and attack that, so I would expect Kamara to play on the right side of our midfield. Yeah. Again, keep it locked up in the middle, and
Isak has back at the 10, right? That's what you're doing again. Yeah.
Yep, keep him at the 10. Do you switch McGinn for Bailey? Maybe, if he's feeling healthy, but I probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
And then you just tell Pau and Konsa, don't let Isak get in behind you.
Yeah.
Because he can, he will, and if he does, he will finish.
Well, and the other
very good striker.
The other benefit of playing like they did more against City is it neutralizes the speed that Newcastle have, because they are lightning fast all over the midfield and the front. So you have to try and shrink the field to keep that as tight as possible. Otherwise, they're in behind and running free on goal.
Completely agreed.
Yeah.
So we've got the same lineup as against City. What have you got for a score?
2-1 Newcastle. I think I just, like I said, I don't feel good about it. I was wrong though. I was wrong against City, so maybe I'll be wrong again.
I have 3-1 Newcastle.
All right, maybe we can both be wrong.
We're not great away.
Yeah.
It bit me with Forest. The opportunities are there, and this is a team, especially right now, that when you give them the opportunities, they are taking full advantage of them and putting them away.
Yeah.
And so I just think, we've won, 4 of 5 now, I think.
Yep.
But like I said earlier, it's 4 of 5 with a lot of flaws against really bad opposition. I think this is the first time that we're playing Forest are a good team. This is the second time that we're playing a good team in that stretch, and I think that a good team is going to expose some of our weaknesses.
Well, if they can keep it the way they did against City, even though City is not playing near as well as Newcastle right now, but if they can limit the chances, that's going to be the key.
That's it right there.
Easy to say, right? But again, that's why I think it's so important to stay compact in defense. Yeah.
Agreed. All right. Well, that's all we got. I will join you from this bar again on Friday
this
afternoon.
Unnamed bar in Maine.
The day after the match.
Yeah.
This unnamed bar in Maine, because we are a no free ads podcast. But what we are, Chris, is always up the villa.
Up the villa.
Hi, Mom and Dad.